All right, back with another long form, and today I want to talk about Tongkat Ali primarily. I do want to cover off a little bit of information about some of the herbs I talked about last week and just clarify a couple of things. One or two I got wrong as well. But also I really want to explain this herb, not just from the science or the studies, but also from my own personal use and the way I really think the herb works best for people. I think there's a really good application for the herb Tongkat Ali, and as I alluded to last week, I always have it in my cupboard for a very specific reason. But in terms of a daily herb that I take all the time, it's not that kind of herb for me, and I'll get into why. But as I did mention last week, it's really because once it's done its job, it can start to result in mood disturbances for me. I just have less ability to deal with frustrating situations calmly and methodically. I'm just too eager to snap, to give in to anger and frustration, and for me that's really not beneficial long term. But in terms of if I am feeling flat and my testosterone is generally low, genuinely low, I should probably say, there's no better herb for bringing me back. And that's happened just recently, as recent as this week. I've actually used it for the past 2 days, and today I can already feel that it's topped me up in as little as 2 days, which is not what the research is going to necessarily point you to, or Andrew Huberman's podcast is going to direct you towards that kind of information. But for someone who's used it a lot, knows these herbs inside out, I can genuinely tell you that it can act that fast. And I can feel it. I'm very tuned into what these herbs are and are not doing. And possibly potentially because I take it alongside other herbs that would probably accentuate the results from the Tongkat, I can feel it that quickly. And it really brings me back when I need it. And I can flatline for so many reasons with test, particularly at my age, but even in my 30s, things can cause that. It can be stress. It can be taking something else that has kind of squashed your feedback loop in some way. In this case, it was Fedosia for me, and I'll get into that another day. Fedosia can definitely cause my body to want to switch off, probably because it's too excitatory in the HPGA. So there's the HPTA and the HPGA, which we'll get into as well a little bit. So there's the gonads, which is the HPGA, and then there's the kidneys, the adrenals, which is the HPTA. So you really want to think about the kidneys as your second set of balls, really. The balls produce test and sex hormones, but so too does the adrenal glands, particularly DHEA, and of course pregnenolone, which is the precursor to DHEA. So that's something to be aware of. And androstenedione, which is another hormone, which may well be responsible for the irritable mood that I get from Tongkat. So we'll touch on that in a little bit as well. That said, fantastic herb to have. And if you have low testosterone, I still don't know if there's anything out there that can beat it. And I don't really think you need anything to beat it. It's so effective. A few other things that are proven to raise testosterone, particularly if they're low, would probably be D-aspartic acid, which seems to basically work in older men with low testosterone, not do much for younger men, and shilajit. One study for fenugreek, just the one. I think fenugreek works a lot more like tribulus, which is sensitizing you to your own testosterone. So they work really good if your test is reasonable. And they're really more aphrodisiacs, whereas Tongkat falls into the category of a testosterone rate, a booster. Really a booster. Boosting you back to your healthy baseline, which cannot be underestimated. And I think Tongkat is probably the only one out of the three that I just mentioned, D-aspartic, shilajit, and Tongkat, that could maybe raise it a little bit beyond your natural baseline. And you can feel that. And that's probably evidenced by some of the studies that are showing strength and lean mass increases in young men. So it's one of the few herbs that'll actually do something significant for younger men outside of just a libido boost, which is not to say that's not valuable as well, if you ask me. Just relighting this old cigar from last week. This is their little Japanese number. Just going to finish it off was considering a microdose today. Once again, got off a call with Jarrett this morning that we booked in, a little one-on-one. Basically just shot the shit. We didn't really get into any strategy yet. I just wanted to kind of tell him the backstory of the NTS and, formally the cave, and set the scene for the content and what we're kind of about. And, we'll dive in a bit deeper in the future, but it was really valuable. I love chatting to that guy. Anyway, a little bit off topic. So Tongkat, very potent herb, very noticeable herb. We've got a really interesting mechanism of action with Tongkat as well. It's pretty complicated, but they've pretty much worked it out. And that's rare for a herb, but the beautiful thing about this herb is not only that it's so potent and noticeable, and as such you'd probably consider it what they class as a inferior herb in some of the traditional herbal practices. And that is, it's probably an inferior herb, which means very strong. So it's a little bit misleading, right? Inferior herb as opposed to a superior herb. So a superior herb is a herb you can take every day. Tunes you up, helps you with anti-aging, detoxification, maintaining hormonal balance and so on. Whereas an inferior herb is actually the more potent herbs. And these are the herbs that will come along and do something more drastic, but that you wouldn't want to necessarily take all the time. One caveat being for Tongkat, you might want to take it all the time when you're much older, maybe in your 70s. There might be a case for taking it all the time, but prior to that, you bring it in when you need it and you bring it back out, in my personal opinion. And some of the research does indicate a little bit of a case to back that up. And that's because, particularly in younger males, after 8 weeks, testosterone starts to decline. So I think the longest you'd want to run it, if you're looking for strength and muscle mass increases and just boosting your testosterone as high as you can naturally, is probably about 8 weeks for a younger male, anyone under 30. Just because at about that point, it sounds like your body's natural checks and balances start to catch up with you. And it starts to figure out that something's making your test higher than it should be. And of course, it starts to work against the herb at around that point, in at least one study anyway. So that's one thing to consider. But for someone like me, I would never run it for 8 weeks. I couldn't possibly hold my life together for 8 weeks on that herb without getting just too irritable to deal with the day-to-day life. So, I just use it for a couple of days, and if I want to run it for longer periods, I use very low doses. I see it being effective as low as, now it depends on the extract probably and obviously the sourcing, but 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, I can really feel it already. 50 milligrams is tons for me. 20, 25 is heaps. And that's kind of funny because most recommendations you're going to get suggest you run up to 600 milligrams a day. And they have done that in studies. And in older men, though, I think it's in some of the oldest males that have been studied with it. And they got huge test boosts with that, up to 600% increases. Now, remember, that's because they're through the floor. You're not going to get a 600% increase if your testosterone is healthy. You might get and some of the lower boosts are around 15%, 16% increase, and that might be all you need to get back up to your best. And that's what's great about the herb. It's what's great about using herbs in general for this purpose. It's going to keep you in a range that's healthy for your body to work with, and push just a little beyond that in the case of Tongkat, in my opinion, and based on the research. Which is great if you actually want to try to get to, I guess, some of those muscle gains potentially from higher test. But that said, we really do see it work on both feedback systems, both hormone production cascades, and that is it works on the HPGA and the HPTA. So in the older men, it seems to get the balls working as well as getting the kidneys working to produce more DHEA. So more DHEA, it's a precursor to testosterone. It's raising pregnenolone, which then raises DHEA potentially in a cascade effect, androstenedione. These are all going to boost energy, mood, and vitality and testosterone because they convert into testosterone It also seems to activate the gonads more so in the older men. So in the younger men, it's probably the HPTA benefits that are actually making it beneficial to them and raising their testosterone, and they're seeing that. The other thing it's doing, though, is lowering SHBG, so it's freeing up more of your bound testosterone as well, and that's why the younger males are probably getting benefits as well from this herb, because it's freeing up bound test, it's raising it a little bit through DHEA, through the kidney production from the adrenals, and they're getting the benefits that way, whereas the gonads are generally producing a fair bit of testosterone at that age, 20 to probably 30. But, don't underestimate the fact that things can still disturb that. You can have a concussion to the balls. You can have an accident. You can have all kinds of things in your life, even in that decade, where you may not be at your optimal, and this herb could bring you back. So there's really a use case for anyone here that wants to raise their testosterone to reach for this herb, and I recommend everyone have a tub of at least some decent brand in the cupboard for when you need it, when you're feeling really flat, and you'll be able to tell. You'll be able to tell through a few different sort of mechanisms. You'd generally be able to tell because you won't wake up with as much morning wood. Now, that can be based on the timing of when you're waking up, so you don't always want to use that as your entire guide. Through the night, if you have to get up to pee and you notice that you have an erection, or sometime in the morning or shortly after waking up, if you're sort of getting one kind of easily, then generally your testosterone's pretty good. But there's a lot of other markers, energy levels, feeling confident, and feeling that aggro just in your back pocket, just if you need it in a situation. If it spills over into being highly irritable, not reacting well to situations that you'd otherwise normally be able to handle, that's when I think it's time to pull out a herb like this. And it's certainly something that you experience on anabolic steroids, which is far from ideal. So anyone that's sort of dabbled in that will kind of know what I mean. And even things like loud noises will irritate you if you take a large dose of Tongat for too long. You'll actually become triggered. And that's usually how you know it's an okay time to reduce the dose, skip a day in between doses, or 2 days or 3 days in between doses. I find if I just do it once a week, it doesn't matter so much the dose. Believe it or not, even large doses and small doses seem to have a very similar effect for me, in that they will just tap that accelerator pedal, and then throughout the week I'll find that I have higher tests, but that irritability issue isn't so much there. But my main go-to thing to do is bust open a cap, sprinkle a little bit into my coffee when I'm feeling flat, and generally do that for 1 or 2 days in a row, and then I'm good until I feel I need it again, which may not happen for weeks. That's just me. I really feel very consciously aware of where my testosterone is at any given time. And I take a lot of these other herbs to synergize with my natural test to get it operating as optimally as possible in the body. So the tribulus potentially sensitizing me to my own testosterone even better. Same to a degree with the fenugreek, plus some other benefits there with blood sugar maintenance, and potentially freeing up a bit of bound test there too. Some boron for that purpose as well. Magnesium even. And so on. I like to keep that nice little sort of stack going. Vitamin D. But I'll bring in the Tongat when I need it, as I keep mentioning. So there's a few things that it's been shown to do. As I've already mentioned, it does work in younger males. There's probably about 2 studies where that's been shown to have an effect. There's also a study showing increases in lean muscle mass and reductions in body fat. So that seems to be quite promising for anyone that's actually looking for some of those benefits from a test booster that traditionally you wouldn't think a test booster can provide. Tongat seems like it can. So if you actually want more strength and aggression in the gym, and maybe a little bit more muscle gain, and some fat reduction, welcome benefit, it probably can actually do that. It's probably the only herb I'm aware of that could do that. I would look to things like ecdysterone, if you can get a good quality testosterone, sure, creatine, for that more so, but Tongkat might be the one herb in, I guess, the testosterone boosting category, because those other ones don't raise testosterone, they just boost protein synthesis. Creatine maybe has a small impact, probably just from the ergogenic benefits of training better though. But Tongkat might be the one that can. So you could include it in a muscle builder category as well. Yeah, you could have an argument for that. Freeing up bound testosterone, yes, there's multiple studies suggesting it's doing that. It's lowering SHBG. That's a very effective way to get more out of the testosterone that you have as well. So not only is it increasing production through two of the hormonal systems, the feedback loops in the body, it's also freeing up more of the bound test. So it's really the ultimate herb for testosterone boosting. And it's just a shame that it makes me so cranky, but that makes sense given that it's so effective. One caveat I probably have to provide is that, I have tried SARMs in the past and other, I guess, designer steroids back in the day, pro hormones, and most of them would make me angry. Any that sort of replicated a synthetic testosterone or were like epiandrosterone or androsterone precursor or direct compound, I'd be really, really irritable, and then just as such could never run them. I just couldn't. It just doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my life. So it's no surprise that I'd be sensitive to something like Tongkat. But it does tell me that it's working. It's not the only way to see if something's working. There's other ways to increase irritability through introducing a compound into the body. Too much tryptophan can do that to me, or 5-HTP. And there's reasons for that. We'll save that for another day. There's a few other things. Something that inhibits the estrogen receptor in the brain there. I believe that's the pituitary. Can lead to irritability because it makes you think that your estrogen levels are really low. So there seems to be a link there. Interestingly, Tongkat does seem to be a mild AI, an aromatase inhibitor, in the ledig cells, which are located in the balls. So it prevents the conversion of test to estrogen in the ledig cells. So this also helps reduce probably some of that fat mass in that one study I'm referencing, but also help raise testosterone levels that way as well by getting that balance a bit more in your favor for muscle building. That could also be part of the reason why there's a potential irritability issue for me. It's hard to say, but it's a very, very effective herb at what it does. In terms of the dosing, I've already touched on that I feel like it's effective at, I'm going to say 10 milligrams. For me, even 5 milligrams. It's hard to measure out, though, to be honest. Most supplements are going to give you at least 100. Now, there's a lot of different extracts around. There's a lot. 100-1 is common. 200-1 is common. 25-1 is common. Even 10-1. I've found all of them equally as effective. In fact, in a lot of cases, even the lower concentration extracts have been more potent. So I don't really think you can go wrong. I will talk a little bit about LJ100, which is a standardized extract, which now has a second name. They've renamed it, so it still exists as LJ100, but there's also Feister, which is basically, from what I can understand, LJ100 rebranded. So they're just parallel branding, and that is standardized for the Eucomanone content, which is thought to be the compound causing most of the benefits. And that's standardized to 5% Eucomanone. So basically it means LJ100, which was standardized to a bit more of an entourage. I think it was like 28% uripeptides, which would include the Eucomanone, and another percent possibly for saponins. I'll look that up later. I might even flash it up here when I edit this. But essentially the same extract results in 5% Eucomanone, which is quite high. I've seen 3% and I've seen 1%. We stock a 1% Eucomanone extract, which is 25-1 water aqueous extract. We've got some that are 200-1. That's a very common Tongkat. That's the Switch Nutrition, very effective. The one standardized to the Eucomanone is very effective too, and the LJ100, very effective. Again, you don't need massive doses. If you do see recommendations of 600 milligrams, fine. I mean, it certainly will work at that dose, but it seems completely unnecessary to me unless you really are chasing getting to those super physiological levels of test from the herb. You can try that. But it looks like at about 8 weeks, you need to have a little cycle off, particularly if you're a younger guy. The benefits seem to peak between 2 to 8 weeks. If you're someone that can run it more consistently than me, obviously I'm talking about just bringing it in and out throughout the week or throughout the month as I see fit. So I'm not running it in a straight linear sort of line. But in the studies where they're using consistent dosing and they're measuring against placebo groups and so on, 2 to 8 weeks is where it peaks, and then after 8, it seems to drop off. If you're a younger guy, if you're an older guy, it seems to just keep benefiting, keeping you topped up. And so you can look at those two different methods based on your goal with the herb and I guess your age really and where you think your natural levels are sitting at. We're all different in that way. But very promising. I mean, it's increasing LH and FSH, which, as I've sort of alluded to, seems to be more likely in older men. Younger guys are producing a fair bit of those two signaling hormones, but by doing that, it seems to also increase sperm production significantly. So again, in a younger guy, that might already be a bit higher than in an older guy. I'm saying guy a lot, by the way, but in women, we see a lot of these benefits, obviously not in sperm production, but in testosterone increase, in DHEA increase, pregnenolone, energy, all the vitality, seems to work just as well. And that would probably be because it's working on both of those axes. So obviously in a woman, it's mostly going to work on the HPTA because the adrenal glands in a woman work very similar to the adrenal glands in a man. It's just the ovaries and the gonads that are going to be the major point of difference. So anyway, that said, if you're looking to get pregnant, or get someone pregnant, rather, this does seem to be a good herb to look to for that. I know Shilajit has some evidence around that as well, D-aspartic acid as well, but certainly Tongkat. And I mean, I know men we've sold Tongkat to that used it for that purpose and were successful. I don't know any that weren't. I'm not here to sort of make, it's obviously a bit of a sweeping claim. If there's an underlying issue of some kind, then potentially no herb can help, or it can help, but maybe in a limited way. But it seems to have a very marked impact on sperm production, and there's studies to support that as well. It's probably the most studied herb I've talked about ever. And that's saying something for especially testosterone boosting herbs, which famously get understudied because they don't really benefit too many big players. Who's going to benefit if Tribulus is super effective? It's out there already anyway, in a million different forms. Unless you're sort of chasing a specific extract that you think is a little better, and then you're going to invest some money in some studies to sort of support the product you've made, then there's not a huge amount of incentive. And that's probably part of the reason why there's so many studies for Tongkat. That's because LJ100, the extract that I've been referring to, has got some good backing. And they have done, I think, 16 studies with that. Now there's a new one with the Pfister, very, very promising study, plus all the other studies that are out there as well. So, and these are all human studies that I'm referring to. There are animal studies too, and they show just the same things, but the human studies are very conclusive that it is boosting testosterone. In people that have low, it has the most significant impact. Like I said, up to 600% increase. Now that's someone that's absolutely through the floor and 70 years of age, don't get me wrong. But we're even seeing increases in younger males in smaller percentages, but notable. And we're seeing lean muscle mass increase, fat mass go down, and increases in energy production as well. We've got studies showing that. We've got studies showing a reduction in cortisol. They measured the saliva. So I'd say that this herb, I know some people say they can't take it before bed, that sort of energizes them a bit, but for me, I can take it before bed, possibly because of the cortisol reduction effect, and also because I find that that seems to be a better way to time the dose so that I'm not getting the irritability symptoms so much. I'll tend to have it before bed. And if I'm low the next day, I'll just start feeling better, and I get mood increases up until the point where it just starts to tap me out, and then I go, okay, I'll back it down again, which is interesting. If someone listens to this and then goes and looks at the research, they're going to see that study potentially, and it shows mood improvements. And so you're going to find it hard to understand why I'm talking about becoming very irritable on the herb when in these studies people are reporting enhanced mood. But I really think that's because initially that's what the herb does until you start spilling over into higher testosterone territory than what your body maybe is comfortable with dealing with, or it's because it's pushing out those other hormones or those other mechanisms that are causing that irritability. I'm still not 100% sure. I have heard people mention to me that there's an initial period where the irritability comes in, and after running it for a longer period, that seems to fade away. So that could be something too, but for me, I've never really noticed it fade off. And I've run it for longer periods in the past. I just don't risk it anymore. I won't have a marriage anymore. So there's a few things. So you can look out for the LJ100 extract if you want a really well-studied one. You can look for ones that are standardized to the Eucomanone content, which seems to be the heavy-hitting compound in the plant, or you can just go for any basic extract, because I've found them all effective, and it's very unlikely with Tongkat for it to be fake. Reason being, and you've got to remember, I've got a history with formulating and importing ingredients and working with suppliers of raw materials. Tongkat isn't expensive enough to want to swap out or sub out for some cheaper extract. It just wouldn't be worth the hassle for many suppliers or brands. I doubt it. Whereas there's herbs where you could see a case for it. It's a very expensive herb, something very similar. There's not too many that come to mind. Probably testosterone, just because in my dealings with suppliers. They often told me that there's no such thing as a 10% testosterone. There's only a 2%. And I was like, well, why is one of these big brands and influencers talking about 10%? I've even seen a higher percent than that advertised before. And they were bold-faced just telling me that that's actually not possible. They don't have the extraction processes available to draw out that much. So I don't know. That's what they were telling me. Whether or not that's accurate, I can't really comment. But it does seem like that's one of those herbs that you want to look at, because at 2%, it's a pretty low amount of testosterone. I'd much prefer to go with something like ecdysterone, which has a much higher purity. Seems like it's a lot easier for them to extract, and it's very bioavailable in humans, and seems to have effects on protein synthesis at very low doses. There's that famous study where WADA was considering banning it. It showed some serious improvement. I noticed that with ecdysterone. So anyway, that's a little segue. So you're pretty safe with Tongkat. I think whatever you're able to source and experiment with, you'll probably notice some of the things I'm talking about. If you look into the studies, there's just a plethora of them. And with it working on so many different axes, I think it can benefit a lot of different people. Whereas, something like tribulus, which I love, I talk about that herb a lot because I do love it. It's not going to have much benefit if your test is through the floor. A little bit, but not a lot. What it will do, though, is if you synergize it with something like Tongkat, use Tongkat as the space shuttle to get you back into orbit again, then continue to run your tribulus, you're going to see a lot of benefits, plus a good mood. You'll be a lot more horny and potentially more nitric oxide production in the good old fella. So, that's the way you can look at it. I really see Tongkat as a rocket booster. But you don't want to just keep blasting off into, other galaxies. You want to get into orbit and then stay around your natural levels, just to have all the good stuff and none of the negative stuff about having really high tests. That's my opinion. Take it or leave it. Experiment with the herb and see if you agree. And I think a lot of you will find this. All right, so that covers a fair few aspects of the herb that I wanted to cover off. Some extracts to look out for, some dosing to experiment with. I really think, look, if you're not sure where to start with around 100 milligrams. If it's got 400 milligrams in the cap, fine, go with that. Just go with that and see what you think. You can experiment with intermittent dosing to try to get the sweet spot where you're not experiencing irritability if you do, or you can try really low doses and break open your caps. Or if you don't experience that irritability like I do and many of our clients have, just go for it. Run it for maybe up to 8 weeks if you really want to get the most benefit from actually adding some muscle mass. Libido and aggression and energy and confidence will come much quicker. But if you really want to try to get your test levels up high enough to actually put on a bit of lean mass and reduce some body fat, then run it for at least 8 weeks. And see where you're at after that. Then I would take a break and sort of reset for at least 2 to 4, just to make sure your body's sensitive to the herb. Another dosing protocol could be the 5 on, 2 off classic protocol. You can run it for a bit longer without getting desensitized or getting your body's feedback loop working against you, or 4 weeks on, 1 week off. 4 weeks on, 1 week off, and repeat. See what works for you. For me, like I said, once a week, once every third day, and I try the lower the dose, the better for me, is how it works best for me. But I really bring it in when I feel like something's crashed my test out, and that can be, like I said, a range of factors. And we'll get into Vedosia another day because it's a really effective herb, but it's just too severe. I get stomach issues, and I get a bit of a shutdown effect now. My body just seems to reject the herb. And that didn't happen the first time I ran Vedosia. That happened when I went back to it. It's like my body just remembers it and goes, you know what? I'm not a fan, man. I'm just going to be like, nope. And it makes some sense in the studies, in the rodent models with Vedosia. It did show some toxicity, some oxidative markers in the ledig cells, in the testes. There isn't any great human evidence around Vedosia. I mean, I know it's doing something, don't get me wrong, and it's been used for a very long time in herbal traditions. But there's probably some issues around that herb that are yet to be fully explored, regardless of what your favorite influencer is telling you about it, to be honest. Definitely it's similar to Tongkat in that it's been used for anti-malarial, anti-parasitic situations, but I think Vedosia is really designed to flush you out, to clear out pathogens and parasites, whereas Tongkat is there to restore your vitality when you're dealing with things like chronic fatigue from some of these pathogens, diseases, and what have you. And it definitely does that. I mean, that's the other thing, that there's studies on energy increases. It seems to boost ATP. It seems to have some effects on energy production through CAMP, CAMPs rather. So that's quite a rabbit hole to go down. But I will post up in the comments some of the mechanism of action details, so you can sort of delve into that if you want to. But it makes sense that it increases energy levels. That could also be coming from the DHEA, from the testosterone, but also the way that it's making those things increase in production. It's fascinating. It's a really noteworthy herb. It deserves the recent resurgence it's had in the past 3 years, I want to say, maybe 4, since Andrew Huberman started talking about it and more companies started embracing it. It deserves it. But I think if we want to get to some real talk with herbs, there's some caveats around that. And so I hope what I've provided you with today is useful. I hope you can kind of work in with that. And if you've noticed any of that before, hopefully it validates that for you. So you don't just think you're going crazy, or it was something else you were taking, or you just are an irritable person and you got over it. It could well be linked to that herb. So, bear that in mind. If you've got any questions, please comment below. Reach out on our Instagram or the TikTok and ask me questions. I'm answering all of them. I'm more than capable of doing that at this stage. So please do that. And if you want to source any of these products, like I said, we've got a 1% Eucomanone standardized extract in powder form, which makes it really easy to dial the dose. We'll have some LJ100 soon. We're bringing that in. And we have a really good 200-to-1 from Switch, which I know is very effective. And then the 200-to-1 is probably going to be standardized to about 5% Eucomanone, to be honest, based on the fact that the 1% is a 25-to-1 extract, 200-to-1. I mean, it doesn't always work exactly like that with water extracts. The higher up you go, or I guess the smaller you go, so to speak, the more dense the extraction. Doesn't always mean it's bringing more of active compounds in, but generally that's the idea. So it would probably be safe to say that you're hitting around that 4-5% Eucomanone, which is, look, it's plenty. You don't need a lot of Eucomanone. Like I said, very small doses have very big effects in my personal use. So great herb, powerful herb. It can get you out of a jam, and it's always in my cupboard for good reason, and I love knowing that it's there. It's like my big brother. Anytime I need it to come in and beat someone up for me, it'll do that. And I'm telling you, if I was an MMA fighter or someone that really had to, for a living, use aggressive tendencies, I'd be using this herb on and off extensively because it does help. You do feel more aggressive. And sometimes you need that, sometimes you don't. You know, it really depends. So use it wisely. It's a powerful herb. And if you've got any questions, reach out. Otherwise, I'll speak to you all soon, or hopefully see you in store. Peace, love, and harmony.